The recruitment officer laughed when Katherine "Kit" Sullivan walked into the Air Force Enlistment Center in 1943. "Women don't fly combat missions, sweetheart. Try the nursing corps." 2 years later, that same officer was saluting Captain Michael Thompson, never knowing he was shaking hands with the woman he'd once dismissed, and the pilot who would become a legend. But before we dive into this incredible true story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear is a declassified military operation that challenged everything the Air Force thought they knew about courage, identity, and what it truly means to serve your country. This is the story of the pilot who didn't exist, the 127 missions that defied every rule, and the moment when a perfect deception finally came to light. Katherine Sullivan had always been different. While other girls in Boston played with dolls, Kit was building model airplanes and studying flight manuals her father brought home from his job at the aircraft factory. By age 16, she could identify every fighter plane in service just by the sound of its engine. Her father, Thomas Sullivan, was a mechanic who had worked on some of the first military aircraft during World War I. He saw something special in his daughter's obsession with aviation, but he also knew the harsh realities of 1943 America. "Kit," he'd say, watching her practice aerial maneuvers with her model planes, "you've got the mind of a pilot, but the world isn't ready for women in combat." Kit disagreed. She'd read every aviation magazine, memorized technical specifications, and even learned to fly in secret at a small airfield outside Boston, paying for lessons with money earned from her job at the munitions factory. By the time she walked into that recruitment office, she had more flying hours than most men entering the service. But Sergeant Robert Hayes, the recruitment officer, didn't see a pilot when he looked at Kit. He saw a young woman who didn't understand her place in the world. "Listen, miss," Hayes said, barely glancing up from his paperwork. "We've got the Women's Army Corps if you want to serve. You can be a secretary, a nurse, maybe work in communications. But flying?" He chuckled. "That's man's work." Kit stood there for a moment, feeling the familiar burn of dismissal she'd experienced her entire life. But instead of arguing, she simply nodded and walked out. She had a different plan. The idea came to Kit during a sleepless night 3 weeks after her rejection. If the Air Force wouldn't accept Katherine Sullivan, perhaps they'd accept someone else entirely. She spent months preparing. First, she studied her older brother Danny's mannerisms, the way he walked, talked, and carried himself. Danny had been killed at Pearl Harbor, but his memory provided the template she needed. Kit practiced deepening her voice, cut her auburn hair short, and learned to bind her chest flat beneath loose-fitting clothes. She studied masculine body language, perfected a confident handshake, and even changed her signature to something bold and angular. The most crucial element was creating an identity that could withstand scrutiny. Using Danny's birth certificate and social security number, records that had been lost in a bureaucratic shuffle after his death, Kit became Michael Thompson, a 20-year-old mechanic from a small town in upstate New York. She forged documents with the skill of a counterfeiter, created a complete backstory, and even practiced Michael Thompson's signature until it became second nature. The transformation took 6 months of meticulous preparation. When Michael Thompson walked into the same recruitment center in early 1944, Sergeant Hayes didn't even glance twice. He saw exactly what he expected, another young man eager to serve his country. "Flying experience?" Hayes asked, processing Michael's application. 200 hours civilian, Michael replied in a voice pitched perfectly in baritone. Hayes looked impressed. "We could use someone with your background." "Welcome to the United States Army Air Forces, son." Basic training was a minefield of potential exposure. Kit had to navigate communal showers, medical examinations, and the constant scrutiny of drill sergeants without revealing her secret. She'd wake up an hour before the other recruits to use the facilities in private, claiming she needed extra time for a medical condition that required special hygiene routines. During medical exams, she bribed sympathetic medics with cigarettes and chocolate, claiming embarrassment about old scars from childhood accidents. The physical demands of training were brutal, but Kit's years of factory work had built strength in her compact frame. At 5 feet 6 inches and naturally athletic, she could match most of the men in her unit for endurance and agility. Flight training was where Michael Thompson truly excelled. While other cadets struggled with complex maneuvers, Kit's years of theoretical study and secret practice sessions translated into natural flying that impressed even the most demanding instructors. "Thompson's got something special," flight instructor Captain Reynolds told his colleagues. "Natural feel for the aircraft, exceptional situational awareness, and nerves of steel. This kid's going to be one of our best." Kit's flying scores were consistently in the top 5%. She mastered the P-51 Mustang faster than anyone in her class and showed an intuitive understanding of aerial combat tactics that seemed almost supernatural. But the greatest test came during advanced combat training, when pilots were pushed to their physical and psychological limits. Kit not only survived, she thrived. In September 1944, Lieutenant Michael Thompson was assigned to the 357th Fighter Group, stationed at RAF Leiston in England. The unit was tasked with escorting B-17 bombers deep into German territory, flying missions that had a mortality rate approaching 50%. Kit's squadron mates quickly learned to respect the quiet pilot who seemed to have a sixth sense for danger. Flight leader Major Harrison noticed that Thompson had an uncanny ability to spot enemy aircraft before anyone else, often calling out threats several seconds before they appeared on radar. "Thompson, how do you do it?" asked Lieutenant Charlie Morrison after Michael had once again saved their formation from a surprise attack by German fighters. "Just pay attention to everything," Michael replied in his practiced baritone. "The sky talks to you if you know how to listen." What Kit couldn't tell them was that her smaller stature actually provided advantages in aerial combat. She could withstand higher G-forces due to her compact build, had better peripheral vision than many of her male colleagues, and possessed a natural grace in the cockpit that translated to exceptional flying skills. Her first combat mission came on October 12, 1944. The target was a ball-bearing factory deep in German territory, and the bomber formation faced fierce resistance from Luftwaffe fighters. When 6 Messerschmitt Bf-10-9s dove on the lead bomber group, Michael Thompson reacted with split-second precision. Rolling his P-51 into a steep climb, he intercepted the lead German fighter and sent it spiraling earthward in flames. "Thompson got his first kill!" Morrison's excited voice crackled over the radio. But Kit felt no excitement, only the grim satisfaction of protecting the bomber crews who were depending on fighter escort to get them home alive. Over the following months, Captain Michael Thompson became legendary within the 357th Fighter Group. Mission after mission, his aircraft would return with precise bullet holes showing incredible marksmanship. But more importantly, the bombers under his protection almost always made it home. Kit developed tactics that seemed to defy conventional wisdom. She would position her fighter in seemingly impossible locations, use clouds and sun angles for concealment, and make attack runs that appeared suicidal, but proved devastatingly effective. "Thompson flies like he's dancing with the airplane," Major Harrison observed. "Most pilots fight their aircraft. Thompson becomes part of it." By early 1945, Michael Thompson had been credited with 17 confirmed kills and had earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with oak leaf clusters, and the respect of every pilot in the European theater. But the constant vigilance required to maintain her deception was taking its toll. Kit lost weight, developed chronic insomnia, and lived in constant fear that one medical emergency or equipment malfunction would expose her secret. The closest call came during a mission over Berlin in March 1945. Thompson's P-51 took flak damage that punctured the hydraulic system, and emergency landing protocols required immediate medical examination of the pilot. Kit managed to convince the base medical officer that she'd suffered a concussion that made her modest about medical examination, buying time to arrange for a sympathetic medic who wouldn't ask too many questions about anomalies in her physical structure. April 15th, 1945. The war in Europe was nearly over, but the missions continued. Intelligence reported a formation of experimental German jet fighters operating from an airfield near Munich, aircraft that posed a significant threat to Allied bomber formations. The mission was simple: locate and destroy the jets before they could be deployed against Allied forces. But intelligence also suggested the airfield was heavily defended and that German pilots were prepared to fight to the death. Captain Thompson volunteered to lead the fighter sweep, despite having already completed more missions than required for rotation home. When Major Harrison questioned the decision, Michael's response was characteristically brief. "Job's not finished yet, sir." The formation took off at dawn. 12 P-51 Mustangs led by the pilot who had become synonymous with successful missions. But this time, something felt different to Kit. After 18 months of deception, 127 combat missions, and countless close calls, she sensed that her luck might finally be running out. The German airfield appeared exactly where intelligence had indicated, but so did something else: a formation of 15 Messerschmitt Me-262 jets, the most advanced fighters in the German arsenal. "Bandits at 2 o'clock high." Thompson's voice was calm over the radio. "Jet aircraft, moving fast." All flights engage. What followed was one of the most intense dogfights of the European campaign. The German jets were faster than anything the Allies had encountered, but Kit's experience and tactical brilliance began to show. She maneuvered her P-51 to force the jets into turning battles where their speed advantage was negated, used the superior maneuverability of her aircraft to stay inside their turning radius, and methodically began picking off the advanced fighters one by one. With ammunition running low and fuel becoming critical, Kit faced a decision that would define her legacy. The remaining German jets were regrouping for another attack on her surviving squadron mates, but Thompson's P-51 had sustained significant damage from cannon fire. The smart tactical decision was to break off and return to base. They'd accomplished their mission. Several experimental jets had been destroyed, and the remainder would likely be withdrawn from combat rather than risk further losses. But Lieutenant Morrison's aircraft was trailing smoke and losing altitude, making him an easy target for the regrouping German fighters. "Morrison, can you make it home?" Thompson's voice crackled over the radio. "Negative, Thompson. Engines cutting out. I'm going down over enemy territory." That's when Kit made the decision that would change everything. "All flights, this is Thompson. Proceed to base immediately. I'm staying to cover Morrison's emergency landing." "Thompson, that's suicide." Major Harrison's voice was sharp with concern. "You don't have enough fuel or ammunition for extended combat." But Kit had already committed. She dove her damaged P-51 toward the descending German fighters, drawing their attention away from Morrison's crippled aircraft. What followed was 5 minutes of aerial combat that defied every rule of physics and probability. Flying a damaged aircraft with minimal ammunition, Kit held off 6 German jets long enough for Morrison to crash land safely behind Allied lines. But Thompson's heroics came at a cost. A 20mm cannon shell from the last German fighter punched through the P-51's canopy, sending razor-sharp fragments of metal and plexiglass through the cockpit. Kit managed to nurse her badly damaged fighter back across Allied lines, but engine failure forced her to attempt an emergency landing at a forward airfield. The P-51 hit the runway hard, bounced twice, and slid to a stop in a cloud of dust and steam. Crash crews reached the aircraft within minutes, expecting to find Captain Thompson either dead or severely injured. What they found instead challenged everything they thought they knew about the pilot who had become a legend. Medical Sergeant David Chen, no relation to our earlier story, was the first to reach the cockpit. Thompson was unconscious, blood streaming from multiple lacerations caused by the shattered canopy. Standard emergency protocol required immediate removal of the pilot's flight suit to assess injuries. When Chen cut away the damaged flight suit and removed Thompson's Mae West life jacket, he stopped cold. The pilot he'd expected to find wasn't there. Instead, Chen discovered elaborate binding around the pilot's chest, feminine features that had been carefully concealed by clever makeup and strategic uniform modifications, and physical characteristics that made it impossible to maintain the deception any longer. "Jesus Christ," Chen whispered, looking around to ensure no other medical personnel had yet witnessed the discovery. Working quickly, Chen managed to preserve Thompson's secret long enough to transport the unconscious pilot to a secure medical facility where discretion could be maintained. But he knew that the discovery would soon become impossible to contain. Kit regained consciousness 12 hours later in a military hospital, with Colonel James Patterson, commanding officer of the 357th Fighter Group, sitting beside her bed. Patterson's expression was unreadable, a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and concern about the implications of what had been discovered. "Lieutenant Katherine Sullivan," Patterson said quietly. "Or should I continue calling you Captain Thompson?" Kit's heart sank. After 18 months of perfect deception, her secret was finally exposed. But instead of anger, she saw something unexpected in Patterson's eyes. Respect. "Sir," Kit began, but Patterson raised his hand. "Before you say anything, I want you to know what I've learned about your service record. 127 combat missions, 17 confirmed kills, 0 losses among aircraft under your direct protection, the Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with oak leaf clusters, and the unofficial title of the finest combat pilot in the European theater." Patterson leaned back in his chair. "I also know that Michael Thompson doesn't officially exist. No birth records, no school records, no family members who can verify his identity. What I want to know is why Katherine Sullivan felt she had to disappear from Michael Thompson to serve his country." Over the next hour, Kit told her story. The recruitment rejection, months of preparation, the constant vigilance required to maintain her deception, and the daily choice to risk everything for the chance to serve as a combat pilot. Patterson listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a classified pad. "The question now," Patterson finally said, "is what we do with this information." Colonel Patterson faced an impossible decision. Military regulations were clear. Women were prohibited from combat roles, and Kit's deception constituted multiple violations of military law that could result in court-martial and imprisonment. But Patterson also understood that Captain Michael Thompson represented something unprecedented, proof that courage, skill, and dedication had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with character. "Here's what's going to happen," Patterson said after consulting with his superiors through encrypted communications. "Captain Michael Thompson will be transferred to a classified intelligence unit. His service record will be sealed for national security reasons, and Katherine Sullivan will be quietly discharged with full honors and a pension befitting her actual service." The official story was that Captain Thompson had been selected for a highly classified mission that would prevent any public recognition of his wartime service. His combat record would remain in classified files, accessible only to future military historians studying the evolution of aerial warfare tactics. Kit was given a choice: accept the cover-up and return to civilian life, or face potential court-martial and imprisonment. She chose to disappear as quietly as she had appeared. Katherine Sullivan returned to Boston in June 1945, carrying discharge papers that identified her as a communication specialist who had served with distinction in the European theater. Only a handful of people knew the truth about Captain Michael Thompson, and they carried that secret to their graves. Kit used her combat experience and technical knowledge to become one of the first female test pilots in civilian aviation, though she never spoke publicly about her wartime service. She married fellow pilot Robert Chen in 1947, had 2 children, and lived quietly until her death in 1998. But the legend of Captain Michael Thompson lived on in classified military files and the whispered stories of aging veterans who remembered the fighter pilot who seemed to have guardian angel watching over Allied bomber formations. In 2019, when military records from World War II were finally declassified under the 75-year rule, historians discovered the truth about the 357th Fighter Group's most successful pilot. The revelation sparked debates about military policy, gender equality, and the definition of heroism. Today, a statue stands at the National Museum of the United States Air Force, honoring the unknown pilot who proved that courage has no gender, skill knows no boundaries, and sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones whose true names we never knew. The inscription reads, "To all who served in shadows, fought under false names, and proved that honor lives in the heart, not in the history books." Don't forget to subscribe to Beneath Word Stories for more incredible tales of hidden heroes and the secrets that shaped our world. What do you think about Catherine's choice to risk everything for the chance to serve? Would you have done the same? Let us know in the comments below and tell us where you're watching from today.